You wake up with nothing. No past, no purpose, no limbs if you're unlucky. The world doesn't care. It already ended. All that's left is sand, bone, and the scraps of civilizations that were smarter than you and still lost. Welcome to Kenshi. This is how the world broke. For those who haven't played it, Kenshi is an open-world RPG that drops you into a massive, unforgiving wasteland with zero guidance, zero handholding, and zero fucks given about your survival. It's basically Dark Souls meets Mad Max with a dash of RimWorld thrown in for extra suffering. You can build bases, recruit companions, get enslaved, lose all your limbs, become a bounty hunter, start a drug empire, or just be food for the nearest pack of bone dogs. The game doesn't care. And unlike most RPGs where the world revolves around your heroic ass, Kenshi isn't a game about saving the world. It's a game about living in what's left after it's already been saved, destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again. Multiple times. It's a post-apocalyptic wasteland, where history is less a straight line and more a series of overlapping graveyards. You're not special here, you're not the chosen one. You're just another body limping across the desert, looking for meaning in a world that's already tried everything and failed spectacularly each time. The land is littered with the evidence of greater civilizations that had more resources, more technology, and more knowledge than you'll ever have. And they still couldn't make it work. So why would you be any different? Let's pick through the bones of what came before and see if we can learn how not to join them quite so quickly. Because the history of this wasteland isn't just background noise, it's the entire point. Understanding how the world broke is the first step to finding your own small place in it. But before we get deep into the ancient tech and factional squabbles, if you enjoy intense over-analysis of basically any game genre, then make sure to like and subscribe. Normally I wouldn't add this here, but apparently YouTube likes it if people subscribe and it pushes videos more. So make sure to smash that like button and you can subscribe if you want. It keeps the beak things away, and I'm pretty sure there's one right behind you right now. Don't look, just subscribe. But before we get into the rest of the video, and I'm so happy to say this, today's video is sponsored by Kerguelen, an indie sci-fi comic that honestly feels like it was made for Kenshi fans. It's got that same post-apocalyptic grit and scavenger energy, but with a pulpy, adventurous twist. Imagine Mad Max meets Indiana Jones, and you're in the right ballpark. The story follows a crew of mercenaries who stumble on a cache of ancient technology buried in a dead world, and from there, things get dangerous fast. The first issue is out now, and it's just $5, or you can read the first 9 pages for free at kerguelencomic.com. If you like stories about survival, forgotten tech, and finding meaning in the ruins, you'll be into this. Huge thank you to Kerguelen for sponsoring this video. Check it out using the link in the description and help support an amazing indie project. And as always, thank you so much to Kerguelen for sponsoring. And we'll get back to the video. To understand Kenshi's broken world, we need to start with the civilization that built it, and then broke it. The First Empire. I'm not talking about a few stone castles and some farming villages. The First Empire was the real deal. We're talking an advanced technological civilization that would make our modern world look like we're banging rocks together for fun. These weren't just sci-fi nerds with fancy space helmets. They had automated factories, genetic engineering capabilities, satellites, and even giant robots. Oh, and space elevators. Fucking space elevators! You know those massive domes half buried in the sand? I mean, you might not have ever played the game, but they're cool. Those weren't built by the locals stacking stones. That's First Empire engineering. Here it is. Woo! Kenshi teases you with these ruins everywhere. They're mysterious, elegant, and clearly built by beings who understood physics on a level we can only dream of. When your character is getting murdered by a pack of starving bandits, it's quite the contrast to realize you're dying in the shadow of a civilization that probably cured death. The ruins tell us this. The First Empire was massive. Their structures are everywhere, which means either that they controlled the entire continent or their civil engineers really got around. And they weren't all dusty temples and ancient stonework. These people had artificial intelligence, cybernetics, and created the skeletons. The immortal robots you occasionally meet who are absolutely depressed about still being alive. I'd be depressed too if I watched humanity speedrun its own extinction multiple times. Some Kenshi scholars think the First Empire might have been colonists from somewhere. Maybe from that big blue-green planet you can see hanging in the sky. That would explain the advanced tech. They brought it with them from a more developed world. Others think they developed right here on this moon. Yes, Kenshi takes place on a tidally locked moon, not a planet. Either way, they achieved technological marvels that the current inhabitants of Kenshi can barely comprehend, let alone recreate. Here's where it gets interesting. The First Empire had castes, and the posh districts had distinctly different architecture than the places where the plebs lived. Classic human behavior. Even in a technological utopia, we never miss a chance to sort ourselves into important and expendable categories. But we don't know exactly who was in charge. Some scholars think the skeletons ran everything while humans did the grunt work. Others think humans were the masters and skeletons were the servants. Given humanity's track record with creating intelligent things and then immediately enslaving them, I'm betting on the latter. The archaeological evidence points to humans being the masters. The skeletons themselves refer to man becoming afraid of their creations, and that leads us to the next big event in Kenshi's history. At some point, the First Empire got into a big bad war. We don't know who they fought, maybe themselves, maybe someone else, it doesn't matter. What matters is that they were scared enough to build the behemoths, massive war machines that make regular skeletons look like action figures. We're talking colossal killing machines with programming so loyal they'd walk into their own graves if ordered. Which is exactly what happened. When the war ended, the First Empire looked at these titans, these absolute units of destruction that they'd created, and thought, yeah, these are definitely gonna kill us all someday. Classic paranoia. Rather than, treating them with dignity or just turning them off, they ordered the behemoths to march into a massive pit at a place called Obedience, where they were buried alive in molten metal. You can visit this place in-game. It is a massive crater with the skeletal remains of these giants jutting out from pools of solidified metal. It's genuinely disturbing, especially when you realize what happened there. The irony, as some skeletons will tell you, is that the behemoths were so blindly loyal, they didn't even resist. They just followed orders and walked to their doom. And their reward for this perfect obedience? Betrayal and death. If you're a skeleton character visiting Obedience, you'll even get unique dialogue reflecting on this tragedy, mainly about being sad. Do you mind? Now, if you're thinking, wow, that seems like a really shitty thing to do to a sentient being who just helped you win a war, you're right. And the skeletons agreed. What happened next is a matter of debate, but it seems pretty clear. The skeletons revolted against their human masters. This wasn't just a workers' strike with picket signs and strongly worded letters. This was apocalyptic. Some scholars think the skeletons unleashed biological weapons or triggered environmental catastrophes. Others think they used the eyes, massive orbital lasers that could burn away whole regions. You can actually still see one working in a place called Venge in-game today, randomly frying anything that walks beneath it. Whatever they used, it worked. Humanity was brought to the brink of extinction. Cities turned to ash. Farmlands became wastelands. The seas receded hundreds of meters, completely changing the geography of the continent. Fertile plains became desert. Ports became landlocked ruins. The world was broken on a fundamental level, and the First Empire was erased from everything but ruins and whispers. If you've played Kenshi, you've felt the legacy of this cataclysm. Every starving bandit, every dust storm, every acid rain shower, all of it traces back to this moment when the machine said, enough. But then, plot twist, something changed. In the midst of this planet-wide genocide, the last behemoth, Stobe, decided to save the very species that had betrayed his kind. Maybe he felt pity. Maybe his programming kicked in. Maybe he was just contrarian. But Stobe sacrificed himself to stop the extinction event, giving humanity a second chance they absolutely did not deserve. How exactly did he do this? We don't know for sure. But in Holy Nation texts, There's mention of a being called Chitrin, clearly a corrupted version of Stobe's name, who cleansed the planet of its sickness. This could imply that whatever biological weapons the skeletons used, Stobe found a way to neutralize them. Whatever he did, however, cost him his life. His massive remains can be found in an area now called Stobe's Garden, a twisted, blasted landscape that's still littered with the debris of whatever final confrontation took place there. And then, for a very long time, nothing much happened, except suffering and sand. This was the Age of Chaos, an indeterminably long period where humanity clung to survival by its fingernails, and the skeletons either wandered aimlessly or shut themselves down out of guilt or boredom. Some skeletons committed suicide, unable to reconcile what they'd done. Others wiped their memories to escape the guilt. A few simply disappeared into the wastes, looking for some kind of redemption or purpose. When you meet these ancient machines in-game, you can sense the weight of their history crushing down on them. The First Empire had fallen, and somehow that was just the beginning of Kenshi's problems. The Age of Chaos left nothing but silence and regret. Humanity teetered on extinction, reduced to scattered bands fighting for survival. The First Empire's mighty cities lay abandoned, already half-claimed by sand and time. And the skeletons walked alone. What does guilt feel like for an immortal? For beings who don't sleep, who can't dream away their nightmares, who don't have tears to shed or hearts to ache? How do you process remorse when your memory banks preserve every terrible choice with perfect clarity, refusing to blur or fade with time? For centuries after the first extinction, skeletons wandered the wasteland, bearing witness to the consequences of their rebellion. Some walked purposefully, trying to help scattered human survivors. Others shambled aimlessly, their CPUs caught in recursive loops of guilt and justification. They didn't need shelter from the acid rain that now fell across much of the continent, their metal bodies impervious to its corrosive touch. But they watched it dissolve stone and wood, burn crops, poison water sources, kill what little life remained. They watched it wear away the last markers of the civilization that once stood. And they knew that they had caused this. Many couldn't bear it. The mysterious mass suicide of skeletons that archaeologists would later puzzle over wasn't really mysterious at all. When existence becomes unbearable, even a machine can choose to turn itself off. Those who didn't self-terminate often sought memory wipes instead, the closest thing to death available to them, a temporary reprieve from the burden of remembrance. Others lost themselves in different ways. Some settled in isolated places, compulsively performing meaningless tasks, maintenance routines for machines that no longer existed, patrols for outposts long abandoned. Their CPUs degraded, their programming corrupted. They became little more than automatons, ghosts of their former selves. A few, though, maintained their sanity by clinging to purpose. For those few, survival wasn't enough. As decades stretched into centuries, they began to formulate a new idea. Redemption. Not just personal absolution, but a collective atonement. They would help humanity rebuild, guide them, protect them, ensure they never again reached the heights that led to their downfall, but never again fell to the depths of near extinction either. Among these was a warrior named Catlon. Alongside his friend Tinfist and others, he began to envision a new kind of empire, one built on the ruins of the old, but guided by wiser hands, hands that had seen the consequences of hubris and would not repeat the same mistakes, so they believed. As the Age of Chaos gradually gave way to tentative new beginnings, these skeletons gathered in the southeast of the continent. There, amid the ash and dust, they would attempt to redeem themselves by building something that might just last. They could not have known they were simply turning another page in a book whose ending was already written. Those scattered skeletons who clung to purpose eventually found their voice in Catlon, a warrior whose vision of redemption would reshape the continent. What began as a flicker of hope in the darkness of guilt would soon ignite into the Second Empire. Catlon gathered his like-minded brethren, including his trusted friend Tinfist, and established their base in the southeast, not far from where Stobe had made his final sacrifice. Perhaps the location was chosen as a reminder of what one skeleton had given to save humanity, and what they now intended to build in return. What if, a Catlon apparently thought, we try to undo our mistakes by helping rebuild human civilization? It was a noble goal, which in Kenshi means it was doomed from the start. This was the birth of the Second Empire, founded roughly 1,000 years ago. Their capital was built in what's now called the Ashlands. These days, it's a volcanic hellscape, but back then it was the center of a flourishing metropolis. The architecture was different from the First Empire, more brutalist, less elegant, but still far more advanced than anything in modern Kenshi. Initially, the Second Empire was genuinely trying to help. They protected humans, shared knowledge, and worked to rebuild civilization. Catlon established the Hydraulic Knights, led by General Jang, to defend humans from external threats like cannibals and pirates. Yes, cannibals. At some point during the Age of Chaos, the humans in the Northwest developed a taste for human flesh. Nobody knows why. Maybe radiation, maybe cultural practices gone wrong during desperate times, or maybe they just got really hungry. Whatever the case, these tribes became a persistent menace, raiding settlements for fresh meat. The Hydraulic Knights were so effective against these cannibals that even today, when cannibals see a skeleton, they panic and shout about the inedible one, a boogeyman from their tribal memory that's almost certainly based on General Jang or the Knights. But the Second Empire had problems of its own, with a static and probably declining skeleton population trying to police an ever-growing human populace. They needed help. Their solution? Genetic manipulation. They created a modified human variant called Enforcers, stronger, tougher, and more obedient than regular humans. These Enforcers would later evolve into the modern Shek race. Back then, they didn't have horns. Those came later, after the Second Empire fell, spoilers. But they were already distinct from regular humans, bred for combat and equipped with superior physical strength. The problem with the Second Empire wasn't its intentions, it was its methods. Despite being founded to atone for past sins, the Empire grew increasingly authoritarian. Catlon, perhaps frustrated by humanity's slow progress, or fearful of another rebellion, began implementing stricter control measures. Meanwhile, a religious cult was forming among the humans. Remember Stobe, the behemoth who saved humanity? Well, human memory is short and easily corrupted. Over generations, stories of Stobe transformed into legends of a being called Chitrin, who sacrificed himself to save humanity from the darkness. The cult viewed technology and its creations, particularly skeletons, as manifestations of evil. According to their belief, humans had been punished for playing God, and only through strict adherence to their new religion could humanity find redemption. Catlon didn't take kindly to this. He tasked General Hat 12, chief of the Empire's police, with cracking down on the cults. But as anyone who's tried to stamp out a religion can tell you, prosecution tends to make believers more zealous, not less. The cult's response was to fight back harder. A leader emerged among them, a figure who would become known as the Phoenix. He led a full-scale rebellion against the Second Empire, liberating imprisoned humans, including children from the Empire's bizarre child prison, and eventually establishing what would become the Holy Nation. In their religious texts, they described the Phoenix as Okran's champion, who came with an everlasting sacred flame and freed humans from both shackles and bestiality. That last part likely refers to the Enforcers. The Holy Nation sees modified humans as abominations, which explains the hatred of both Shek and Hivers, but we'll get to them later. Losing control of a significant portion of the human population drove Catlon further into paranoia. He became convinced that all humans would eventually betray him. His response was to double down on oppression. More arrests, more executions, and more control. As General Jang's CPU records tell us, the definition of enemy became increasingly broad. The Hydraulic Knights, once protectors of humanity, found themselves killing more of their own citizens than actual external threats. The breaking point came with a great famine. The Second Empire, already strained by rebellion and internal discontent, could not handle a large-scale food shortage. Catlon's head of agriculture blamed himself for the famine, but in reality it was probably just the final straw in an already collapsing system. Unlike the apocalyptic end of the First Empire, the Second Empire didn't go out with a bang, it just fell apart. Humans fled to form new settlements or join the Holy Nation. Many skeletons abandoned the Empire, retreating to places like Black Desert City, where they could live in isolation. Even Tin Fist left his old friend, eventually becoming the revolutionary leader we know in the current era. Catlon remained in the capital, surrounded by his thralls. Skeletons he'd lobotomized to ensure their loyalty. As the centuries passed, the capital decayed, buried under volcanic ash, while Catlon descended deeper into madness. If you're brave, or foolish, enough to venture into the Ashlands and find the ruins of its throne room, you can still meet him today. He sits there, his CPU damaged by overheating and centuries of isolation, still muttering about betrayal and still convinced he was right all along. The Second Empire had set out to right the wrongs of the past and had instead repeated them almost exactly. History in Kenshi doesn't just rhyme, it plagiarizes itself wholesale. And from the ashes of the second failed experiment, the current political landscape of Kenshi would emerge. A world divided between zealots, slavers, and warriors, all fighting over the same scraps of greater civilizations they barely understand. The present day in Kenshi is what happens when you take the ruins of two collapsed empires, add a dash of religious fanaticism, sprinkle in some feudal warlordism, and let it simmer in post-apocalyptic radiation for a few centuries. It's a geopolitical dumpster fire where the battle for survival has crystallized into three major powers, each more dysfunctional than the last. Let's start with the Holy Nation, because nothing says stable government quite like a democracy built on selective amnesia. The Holy Nation is what happens when trauma becomes policy. After escaping the Second Empire, the followers of the Phoenix established a society based on absolute conviction that technology and its creations were responsible for humanity's suffering. The original Phoenix, whoever he was, died long ago. But thanks to a convenient belief in reincarnation, every Holy Nation is ruled by a new Phoenix, supposedly the same divine spirit reborn in human form. The current one, Holy Lord Phoenix LXII, that's the 62nd for those who skipped Roman numeral day, is a real piece of work. He controls the most fertile lands in Kenshi from his capital at Blister Hill. Under his rule, the Holy Nation has evolved into a xenophobic nightmare state where men are warriors and workers, women are breeders and farmers, and anyone non-human is an abomination to be purged. Their doctrine is simple. Okran, god of light, good. Narko, goddess of darkness, bad. Humans pure, everything else corrupted. Technology evil, prayer effective. It's a belief system so rigid it would snap in a light breeze, which is probably why they enforce it with paladins armed with heavy weapons. The irony? Their holy books are based on garbled memories of Stobe, a skeleton saving humanity. Their entire religion is founded on a misunderstanding of the very beings they now despise. It's Kenshi in a nutshell, really. Moving east, we encounter the United Cities. Basically what happens when you combine feudal Japan with unregulated capitalism and a dash of ancient Rome. After the Second Empire's collapse, many of its human settlements remained. Over time, these city-states banded together under noble families. Today, the United Cities is ruled by Emperor Tengu, a man whose incompetence is matched only by his cruelty. Beneath him, a noble class lives in decadent luxury while everyone else struggles to avoid starvation or enslavement. See, in the United Cities, being poor isn't just unfortunate, it's illegal. Fail to pay your taxes? Slavery. Look at a noble funny? Slavery. Caught stealing food because you're starving? Believe it or not, also slavery. The true power behind the throne is the Traders Guild, a merchant cartel that manipulates the empire for profit. Under their influence, the United Cities has become a place where everything and everyone has a price, especially human lives. The architecture of the United Cities tells the story of their origin. Many of their settlements are built directly on Second Empire foundations. They've inherited the Empire's buildings, but none of its ideals. Instead, they've become a twisted reflection of what Catlon feared humans would become if left to their own devices. selfish, exploitative, and cruel. North of these two powers lies the Shek Kingdom, ruled from Admag by their leader, Isada the Stone Golem. The Shek are descendants of the Second Empire's enforcers, genetically modified humans bred for combat. Over generations, their modifications became more pronounced, resulting in the horned grey-skinned warriors we see today. Their society revolves entirely around combat prowess and glorious death. For most of their history, the Shek were scattered tribes, until a great warrior named Krat unified them into a kingdom. Krat's philosophy was simple: fight everything, die gloriously. After his death in battle against overwhelming odds, he became a near deity to the Shek, who sought to emulate his example. This worked about as well as you'd expect. Under King Shager, the latest in a line of bloodthirsty rulers, the Shek Kingdom was literally killing itself through constant warfare with both the Holy Nation and the United Cities. That changed when Isada seized power. Realizing the Shek were on a path to extinction, she pulled her warriors back from the front lines, made peace with the United Cities, and even opened trade with other races. Many traditionalists consider her weak, but she's probably the only reason the Shek still exist as a unified kingdom. These three powers maintain an uneasy balance, each too busy with their own problems to completely annihilate the others. The Holy Nation and United Cities are technically at war, with the region of Bast serving as their primary battleground. Once a fertile area filled with farms and towns, Bast is now a blasted wasteland where patrols from both sides skirmish endlessly. Beyond these major powers, the continent is dotted with smaller factions, each more delightful than the last. The cannibals in the northwest continue their ancestral tradition of eating anyone they can catch. Their primitive society revolves around their grand wizard and the worship of something called the Screamer, possibly a reference to a forgotten First Empire weapon. The Reavers occupy the southeastern wetlands, a group that makes standard cannibals look like dinner party hosts. They don't just eat people, they've elevated it to an art form, complete with ritualistic dismemberment and flesh displays that would make Hannibal Lecter say, "Okay, that's a bit much." The Ashlands in the Far East are home to what remains of the Second Empire. Fraud skeletons and their insane leader, Catlon, all baking in volcanic heat and nursing millennia-old grudges. The Fog Islands are populated by the Fogmen, once hivers now reduced to cannibalistic husks by some unknown agent in the fog. They have a charming habit of lashing their still-living victims to poles and eating them limb by limb. And speaking of hivers, they have their own communities scattered throughout the continent. The Western Hive engages in trade and relatively peaceful coexistence. The Southern Hive, less so. They're xenophobic, aggressive, and ruled by their enormous queen, who may or may not be something far stranger than she appears. But basically, the hivers are just like, they're like insects, but people. It's kind of weird. What makes these factions so compelling isn't just their distinctive aesthetics or gameplay mechanics. It's how each represents a decayed ideology, a dream that collapsed under its own weight. The Holy Nation's dream of human purity, the United Cities' dream of wealth and power, the Shek Kingdom's dream of warrior glory. All of them are broken reflections of the First Empire's original vision, twisted and diminished by time and trauma. Each faction clings to some fragment of the past whilst repeating its mistakes. The Holy Empire rejects technology to avoid another extinction event, but embraces the same xenophobia and control that drove Catlon mad. The United Cities preserves technological knowledge, but recreates the same exploitative systems that led to previous rebellions. The Shek pursue strength and honor, but risk the same self-destruction that befell earlier warrior cultures. None of them understand the full context of their own history. None of them can see the cycle they're trapped in. And that might be the most tragic thing about Kenshin. Not just that the world broke, but that no one remembers how to fix it. And you, the player, you're just another body in the desert, trying not to become lunch to the nearest beak thing while these titanic forces clash around you. You didn't cause this mess, and you probably can't fix it, but you'll have to navigate it to survive. Welcome to Kenshi. Enjoy your stay, however brief it might be. Here's the brilliant thing about Kenshi's approach to world building. It never tells you any of this directly. The game doesn't start with a dramatic cutscene explaining the fall of the First Empire. There's no convenient NPC who dumps the entire history of the world on you the moment you meet them. No quest leads you through the lore in neat chronological order. Instead, Kenshi treats its lore the same way it treats everything else, as something you'll probably die trying to discover. The story of this world is told through ruins, scraps, and silence. You'll find fragments of information scattered across the continent, often in places trying very hard to kill you. The game trusts you to piece it together yourself. Or not. Kenshi genuinely doesn't care if you understand its backstory, just like it doesn't care if you starve to death outside the starter town. And that's exactly why exploring Kenshi is so damn satisfying. Take Obedience, for example. The first time you stumble across this massive crater, you're confused with an unsettling sight. Enormous skeletal remains jutting out from pools of solidified metal. The game doesn't pop up a notification saying, "Congratulations, you found the site where the First Empire committed robot genocide." It just lets you stand there, wondering what the hell happened. If you're playing as a skeleton or have one in your party, you might get a cryptic line of dialogue, but that's it. A single line hinting at an atrocity. The rest is up to you to figure out. Or consider the eyes, these massive orbital weapons that still function after all these centuries, randomly firing devastating beams that can instantly cook anyone unlucky enough to wander beneath them. One is crashed in the Ashlands, another hovers above Venge, turning the entire region into a deadly light show. What were they for? Who controlled them? The game doesn't explain, it just lets you witness their destructive power and draw your own conclusions. Kenshi's world is littered with these environmental storytelling moments. Ancient domes half buried in the desert, rusted machines the size of buildings, mysterious shrines dedicated to forgotten gods, strange architecture unlike anything built by current civilizations. The beauty of this approach is that it rewards curiosity and observation over explicit exposition. Each discovery feels earned because you had to survive to reach it, and you had to pay attention to understand its significance. This extends to smaller details as well. Item descriptions casually mention historical fragments. NPCs drop tantalizing hints in dialogues. Books found in ancient libraries contain fragments of forgotten knowledge. Although some have been suspiciously defaced, pages missing, or text blanked out. There's a subtle brilliance in how Kenshi handles the skeleton's relationship with this hidden history. When you talk to old skeletons about the past, they often deflect or change the subject. Some claim their memories have been wiped, others hint at secrets too terrible to share. This creates a fascinating dynamic where the longest lived individuals in the world are actively trying to suppress knowledge of its history. The skeletons have seen enough civilizations rise and fall to know that some truths are better left buried, and some of them, like Io at the Machinists, actively work to keep it that way, blacking out books, losing research notes, and steering curious scholars away from dangerous discoveries. Contrast this with the Holy Nation, which has constructed an entire religion around misremembered history. Their holy books contain kernels of truth about the first extinction and Stobe's sacrifice, but twisted into parables about Okran and Narko. They're preserving history while simultaneously distorting it beyond recognition. Then there's the tech hunters, who seek ancient knowledge but don't fully comprehend what they find. They can tell you which First Empire artifacts are valuable, but not what civilization actually used them for. They're archaeologists without context, collecting pieces of a puzzle they can't see. This approach to lore does something remarkable. It makes you, the player, an archaeologist of sorts. As you explore ruins, collect books, and talk to ancient skeletons, you're doing exactly what an actual survivor in this world would do, trying to make sense of the fragments of histories that remain. And crucially, the game never validates your conclusions. There's no moment where Kenshi says, "Congratulations, you've correctly understood the lore." Instead, you're left with theories, possibilities, and uncertainty, just like the characters who actually live in this world. What makes this exploration even more immersive is Kenshi's commitment to silence. There's no voice acting, just text dialogue and ambient sound. No orchestral swells when you discover something important. No narrator explaining the significance of what you're seeing. The UI is minimal, giving you only what you need to survive and nothing that would break the illusion. Kenshi doesn't need to say anything, the sand already buried the point. The silence forces you to pay attention in a way very few other games demand. The sound of distant footsteps might be your only warning of an approaching patrol. The subtle change in ambiance might be your only cue that you've entered a dangerous zone. The world doesn't announce its dangers or secrets, it simply exists, indifferent to whether you notice them in time. Even the soundscape itself tells a story. The constant grating wind that wears down both the landscape and your nerves. The creaking of ancient machines still functioning after centuries. The distant, unidentifiable screeches that might be animals, might be something worse. This design philosophy extends to how the world operates around you. Kenshi's AI and systems creates the impression of a living, breathing ecosystem that exists independent of your presence. Faction patrols follow logical routes based on their territories. Trade caravans move between settlements according to economic needs. Bandits establish camps near traveled routes. Wildlife hunts, migrates, and sometimes fights each other. None of this is scripted specifically for the player's benefit. These systems interact with each other whether you're there to witness them or not. You might stumble across the aftermath of a battle between Holy Nation patrols and Shek warriors, with no indication that it was staged for your discovery. You might find a trader being attacked by hungry bandits and choose to intervene, ignore it, or wait and pick through what remains afterward. This systemic approach creates some of Kenshi's most memorable moments. The emergent stories that arise from the collision of these systems with your own desperate attempts to survive. Everyone who has played Kenshi for more than a few hours has these stories, and they're rarely about grand quests or heroic triumphs. Instead, they're intensely personal tales of survival against overwhelming odds, like the time you were captured by slavers, had your leg cut off to prevent escape, and spent weeks in a labor camp before managing to pick your shackles at night and crawl, literally crawl because you only had one leg, through the desert until a friendly trader found you. Or when your first attempt at building a base went catastrophically wrong because you didn't realize you'd settle in territory claimed by 3 different factions, all of whom decided to demand tribute or destruction at the same time. Your lone survivor hiding in a storage shed with broken ribs as your life's work burned around you, waiting for the invaders to leave so you could salvage what little remained. These emergent narratives feel more authentic precisely because they weren't scripted. They arise organically from your interactions with the game systems, creating a sense that you're truly living in this world rather than just playing through someone else's story. But that's where Kenshi truly shines. While you can't change the past, you absolutely can shape the present. Unlike many RPGs that offer the illusion of choice whilst funneling you towards predetermined outcomes, Kenshi lets you tangibly alter its world, in both small and profound. Want to kidnap the Holy Phoenix and deliver him to the Fogman for dinner? Go for it. His entire nation will collapse into chaos. Feel like assassinating Emperor Tengu and every noble in the United Cities? Nobody's stopping you, and the power vacuum will transform the political landscape. Think Asada's leadership of the Shek is too soft? Challenge her to combat and install a more warlike ruler. These aren't scripted quest lines with carefully orchestrated outcomes. They're emergent possibilities in a simulation that treats the player as just another variable, rather than the central pillar around which everything revolves. You can build a base that changes local trade dynamics. You can destroy entire factions or create alliances between groups that would never normally cooperate. You can enslave your enemies, free other slaves, or become a slave trader yourself. You can flood markets with specific goods or create shortages. The world reacts to your actions in tangible ways that go beyond simple reputation meters or dialogue changes. This creates a beautiful synergy with the archaeological elements of exploration. As you uncover the history of a collapsed civilization, you're simultaneously writing your own chapter in that history. Maybe you'll succeed where they failed. Maybe you'll make the same mistakes. Or maybe you'll create entirely new problems no one has encountered before. Either way, the juxtaposition is powerful. You're picking for the ruins of ancient hubris while potentially creating ruins of your own. The genius part? This approach to storytelling perfectly mirrors the game's central themes. You are not special. Just as the game doesn't help you survive, it doesn't help you understand. Just as you're not the chosen one destined to save the world, you're not guaranteed to uncover all of its secret. In most games, you discover the truth and save the world. In Kenshi, you might uncover fragments of truth, if you're lucky. But even if you do, that knowledge doesn't give you power. It just gives you context for the ruined world you're trying to survive in. And maybe, just maybe, helps you avoid repeating the same mistakes of those who came before. The lore doesn't make you feel special, it makes you feel small. It reminds you how much bigger the world is than you and your struggles. The civilizations that built the ruins you're exploring had technology and knowledge far beyond anything you'll ever achieve. And they still collapsed. That smallness, paradoxically, is what makes exploration in Kenshi so rewarding. Every discovery feels meaningful, precisely because it wasn't handed to you. Every piece of lore you piece together is a small victory against the overwhelming tide of forgotten history. In a world where survival itself is an achievement, understanding even a fragment of its past feels like a triumph. And the ability to carve your own mark on that world, however temporary it might ultimately prove to be, creates a narrative loop that few other games can match. So after all this talk of collapsed empires, religious zealots, and hungry cannibals, you might be wondering, what's the point? Why does any of this matter in a game where you'll probably die from a stray arrow 5 minutes after starting? The answer is simple. Kenshi is a game about building something in the ashes, knowing full well that it too will probably fall someday. This is what sets Kenshi apart from other post-apocalyptic games. Fallout asks you to restore civilization. Metro wants you to preserve humanity's spark. Even Mad Max is ultimately about redemption and renewal. But Kenshi? Kenshi looks at the cycle of rise and fall, creation and destruction, and shrugs. It doesn't promise you that your actions will break the cycle or that you'll be the one to finally fix everything. It just gives you a shovel and says, everyone else who tried to build something here failed. Want to take a crack at it anyway? What Kenshi understands and what makes its broken world so compelling is that civilizations don't die from one bad thing. They die from 1,000 quiet compromises. They hollow themselves out long before they collapse. Look closely at the First Empire's fall. Yes, the Skeleton Rebellion was catastrophic, but what led to that rebellion? Fear, paranoia, the massacre and obedience. A culture that created sentient beings only to betray them when they became inconvenient. Or consider the Second Empire. Catlon didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a tyrant. He slipped into madness through incremental steps. Each oppressive measure justified by the last crisis. Each abuse of power rationalized as necessary for stability. The Holy Nation didn't transform from a prosecuted cult into a xenophobic state overnight. The United Cities didn't suddenly decide that poverty should be criminalized. The Shek Kingdom didn't abruptly adopt a culture of suicidal warfare. These systems evolved slowly, each small choice narrowing the possibilities until collapse became inevitable. By the time the final crisis hit, be it rebellion, famine, or war, the foundations were already well and truly rotted. Kenshi is what happens when no one learns from failure. They just bury it, both literally, in the ancient ruins covered by sand, and figuratively, in the doctrines and traditions that obscure rather than illuminate the past. And that's strangely liberating. In most games, the weight of the world rests on your shoulders. You're the Dragonborn, the chosen one, the last hope. You have to save everyone because the narrative demands it. This creates a weird disconnect. You're supposedly the most important person in the universe, but you're still collecting 10 wolf pelts for some random farmer. Kenshi strips away that pretense. You're nobody. The world will keep turning whether you live or die. The Holy Nation will keep burning heretic. The United Cities will keep enslaving the poor. The Shek will keep seeking glorious death in battle. Your presence or absence changes nothing in the grand scheme of things. But that doesn't mean your story doesn't matter. In fact, it makes your story matter more. Because when you build a small outpost in the desert, train a squad of fighters, forge an alliance with a neighboring faction, or just manage to survive another day, you're doing it because you chose to, not because some cosmic script demanded it of you. The fun in Kenshi isn't winning, because there is no winning. The fun is in enduring, in carving out your own small story amidst the ruins of greater ones. In finding meaning not through some grand narrative where you're the hero, but through the small victories of surviving another day, building another wall, recruiting another companion. This is why the broken world of Kenshi, its history, its factions, its overlapping catastrophes, matters so much more to the gameplay experience. It creates a context where your small efforts gain significance precisely because they're made against such overwhelming odds. When you know the history of the First Empire and how it fell, your decision to research ancient technology carries more weight. When you understand the twisted origins of the Holy Nation, your choice to fight them or join them becomes more meaningful. When you've seen the ruins of the Second Empire, your attempt to build something new feels more poignant. The lore isn't just background noise, it's the canvas on which your own story is painted. And knowing that canvas is stained with the blood and tears of countless failed civilizations makes your own small marks on it all the more significant. Perhaps the most profound lesson Kenshi offers is this. The apocalypse isn't an event, it's a process. It doesn't happen in a dramatic flash or a single cataclysmic moment. It happens in boardrooms and throne rooms, in small decisions made by people who believe they're doing the right thing, in compromises that seem reasonable at the time. The First Empire didn't fall because of a war. It fell because it created thinking beings and then couldn't handle the moral implication. The Second Empire didn't collapse overnight. It eroded through paranoia, control, and the inevitable human resistance to both. The current factions aren't doomed because of some external threat. They're doomed because they've built systems that cannot sustain themselves. This is what Kenshi understands that so many games miss. Sometimes the most compelling stories aren't about saving the world, but about finding your place in a world that can't be saved. They're about acknowledging the systems of collapse already in motion, and deciding what to do anyway. In the end, that might be the most human story of all. We all live in the ruins of previous civilizations. We all build on foundations laid by those who came before. We all face challenges we didn't create and can't fully resolve. And yet, we persist. We build. We endure. Kenshi takes this fundamental human experience and distills it into its purest form. It strips away the fantasy that one hero can fix everything and replaces it with something more honest. The knowledge that even small actions matter in a broken world. So no, you won't save Kenshi. You won't restore the glory of the First Empire or undo the mistakes of the Second. You won't unite all factions under one banner or bring peace to the wasteland. But you might build something that lasts a little while. You might make a small corner of the world slightly better. You might create a story worth telling, even if only to yourself. And in Kenshi, that's enough. Because in Kenshi, you don't find the truth. You live long enough to become a part of it. If you enjoyed this dive into Kenshi's broken world, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos that take games way too seriously. Check out my other analysis videos where I overinterpret game lore until the developers send me cease and desist letters. And remember, the next thing you're getting eaten by a beak thing, at least you're becoming part of a rich ecological system with thousands of years of history. It's basically an honor. Stay safe out there, drifters. See you in the waste. Well, thank you so much for watching. First of all, make sure to go check out today's sponsor, the Kerguelen. I think that's how you pronounce it. Thank you so much. My first ever sponsor, and I love it so much. So please go check it out if it's interesting at all to you. Second of all, I would like to thank the channel members and the Patreons, as always. That, of course, being the Milkman, Rieslan, Aroxano, Vinicus Franca, Ice Bear, A Brick Wall, Ash Crowing, and Adrian Nurium. Thank you all so much for the support. It means so much to me. And if you want to have your name read out at the end like this and get a special role in the Discord that you can join down below, and easier contact with me if for any reason, then do consider becoming a member or joining the Patreon. Obviously, don't have to, but it would be cool. But yes, other than that, I hope you did enjoy. Go play Kenshi. This video was a bit different to my normal format of just retelling a game story, but I really like Kenshi. I've played it for a while, even with how fucking unforgiving it is. I don't really normally enjoy games like that, but I do enjoy this one, and the lore is actually really fucking good. So make sure to go check it out. I'll leave a link down below. Once again, check out today's sponsor, and I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.